The kettle was just starting to whistle. I liked to let it cry a little before turning off the stove. Something about that sound filled the room with a kind of comfort, the kind only silence and hot tea could follow. Gospel radio played low in the background. I'd already opened the curtains, letting the south side light spill across my little kitchen table. Sunlight bounced off my collection of old spoons, hanging on the wall. Each one had a memory tied to it. New Orleans, Memphis, Birmingham, all places I'd worked, lived, loved. I was setting my mug down when I heard the knock. It wasn't firm, it was sharp, tap, tap, pause, tap. I knew that rhythm. It was her. I hadn't seen her in weeks. And even then, she'd only stayed long enough to offer a tight-lipped compliment about my cozy house and ask if the floors were original. She came in without waiting for me to invite her. I should have locked that door behind me. "Nice place," she said, looking around, her sunglasses still on. She took a seat like it was her own kitchen. Didn't even glance my way. Then with her nails clicking the countertop, she said it. "I need a loan." Just like that. No let up, no how you been, no pleasantries, straight to business. 15,000, she added, like it was $10. I sat down slow, keeping my face even. For what? "A business opportunity. Time sensitive," she said, waving her hand like details were beneath her. I nodded once. Let that sit in the space between us. "Have you spoken to your parents?" She blinked just once, slow. "We figured you'd be more accessible." "Accessible," I repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. "You mean easier?" "Come on," she sighed. "It's family. We're not asking for a gift." I stirred my tea, though it didn't need stirring. "Baby, I worked 32 years at St. Agnes cleaning floors. Helped my son get through college on that salary. I kept this house when everyone else on this block lost theirs. What I got saved for hospital bills and rainy days, not opportunities." She crossed her legs, adjusted her purse, gave me that look that always made me feel like furniture. "So what, you're saying no?" I nodded, calm. "Yes, I'm saying no." The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was loud with unsaid things. "You've never liked me," she snapped, her voice rising like steam. "From the beginning, always judging, always acting like I'm not good enough for your precious boy." I set my cup down. "This isn't about that." "No? Then what is it?" she barked. "You don't want him happy unless it's your kind of happy. You think you raised some perfect little man, but he's cold, just like you, closed off. I should have known." My chest tightened, but I didn't rise to it. "I think you should go." She stood fast, knocking her chair back. "You'll regret this." The door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture frames. I sat still for a long while after she left. My tea had gone cold. I stared at the spot where she'd been sitting, the dent in the cushion still fresh. I'd raised a son I no longer recognized, and he'd married a woman I never understood. Later that evening, I called him. My thumb hovered over his name on the screen longer than it should have. When he picked up, his voice was clipped. "She stopped by today," I said. "We talked." He sighed. I could already hear the wall going up. "I told her no," I added. "It was a lot of money and Why are you always making yourself the victim, Ma?" It hit harder than a slap. Not the words, the tone. I didn't say a thing. Just held the phone to my ear like it might still offer warmth. Then I hung up. The kitchen ticked with the old clock on the wall. I didn't move, just sat there, listening to the years between us stretch wider than the silence. I sat on the edge of my bed with the phone still in my hand, screen dimmed to black, in a car battery nearly drained. It had been hours since that call ended, but my fingers hadn't let go. It wasn't the words he said that stuck, it was how he said them. That voice didn't belong to the boy I raised. That was a man shaped by something I didn't recognize, something colder, sharper. The only sound in the room was the ticking from the old wall clock across from me. That clock had belonged to my mother, and every tick felt like it was cutting time into little wounds. I used to love its rhythm. Now it felt like it was mocking me. I got up slow, knees stiff, and made my way to the kitchen. Thought maybe I'd bake something, keep my hands busy. Cornbread from scratch. Hadn't done that in months. I pulled the flour from the cabinet, grabbed the buttermilk, cracked the eggs. Sometimes you cook just to fill a silence you ain't ready to name, I whispered to myself. As I stirred the batter, I knocked over the flour container. White powder spilled across the counter like snow, and just like that, memory knocked on my door without asking. It was 3 years back. My boy had stopped by alone, no warning, said he had a few minutes between meetings. We sat in this very kitchen. I'd made peach cobbler that day. You staying for dinner? I asked. He shook his head. Nah, can't. Got things to handle. Come to church with me Sunday. The choir's doing that song you used to love. He cut me off. Ma, that stuff ain't for grown folks. You know that. It stung, not because he said it, but because he didn't look up when he did. Just kept swiping at his phone. I reached across the table to fix his collar. He always had one side tucked wrong, like his daddy used to do. Don't do that, Ma. I'm not a kid anymore. He didn't say it mean, but he didn't say it gentle either. I had offered him a little envelope that day, just $200 for emergencies. Life gets tight, I'd said, always better to be ready. He slid it back to me like it was poison. I'm not one of your projects. That envelope sat in my drawer until last week. I finally used it to fix the porch steps. Snapped back to now, I looked at my fridge. That church bulletin from 3 years ago was still pinned up. Edges yellowed, curled from heat and time. I sighed and wiped the flour with a wet rag, but some of it clung to the cracks, just like old words. Later I checked my mailbox. Only 2 envelopes. One was a utility bill with red letters across the top. Past due. That didn't make sense. I remembered paying that. I sat at my laptop, pushed the power button. It whirred like an old man waking from a nap. Took me longer than I care to admit to remember my login. After a few tries, I made it into my bank portal. There it was. My automatic payment settings had been changed 3 months ago. The bills weren't being covered like they should have been. My breath caught. I stared at the screen like it might offer a better answer if I looked long enough. I remembered my son helping me set up this online account years back, saying it'd make life easier, and just like that, it hit me. They don't always rob you loud. Sometimes they do it with logins and smiles. I closed the laptop with more force than I meant to. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. That night, I went into my bedroom and pulled an old notebook from the nightstand drawer. It had flowers on the cover. Used to be where I wrote prayers. But I didn't write prayers that night. I wrote truths. I wrote down the day she called me cold, the day he flinched at my hand, the envelope he pushed back, the church invitation he shrugged off, the bills, the tone, the silence, and then, in big letters that filled the whole page, this was not love, this was manipulation. For the first time in months, I exhaled like I meant it. I used to think silence kept the peace, but now I see it only gave them more space to rearrange my life without asking. The air was heavy with summer heat as I stood behind the folding table, stirring mayonnaise into mashed potatoes, the smell of fresh herbs mixing with memories. I'd always made this potato salad for family gatherings. It was one of my mother's recipes, one of the few things that felt like home. Today, though, it felt strange to be cooking in my own backyard when no one had asked me how or when. I watched Verity command the grill, flipping ribs and barking orders like she'd been born owning the place. She decided the music, the chairs, the guest list. I was grateful they'd included me, but it stung that inclusion came without invitation. At one point, a cousin walked past and said, "She really holds things down around here now." With a smug smile, I forced a smile back, the pause between us full of restless heat. Sometimes you can be the owner of a house and still feel like a visitor in it. I shifted to the side when voices drifted from the patio. There was Gideon talking to Uncle Ray. I leaned closer to eavesdrop. "We already handled the loan with her wife," Gideon said. "Don't worry." My heart twisted. Everyone knew, everyone had made plans, everyone but me. My voice had no weight in matters that threatened my own security. That's when Twist S5 hit me the hardest. I had been bypassed altogether. I cleared my throat, stepped toward him. He glanced over with tight politeness. "We'll talk later," he said, then turned away. Old soul music played somewhere in the background. It felt like someone was stirring up a wound I didn't want to revisit. I drifted toward the porch fence, plate in hand. Laughter erupted. Verity raised her glass, said something about how some folks are just too paranoid to trust kin with money. The crowd laughed, tipped heads her way. My grip tightened around my fork. That crack of mockery echoed through me. Even Gideon half smiled. I stepped back toward the fence of all places, feeling heat, not from the sun, but from humiliation. I sat off to the side and poked at my food. My niece leaned in and whispered, "Auntie, you okay?" I nodded, though my eyes stung. Pain pooled in my voice, but I swallowed it. Too many times I'd swallowed things. Insults masked as jokes. Decisions made without me. Promises broken in silence. I thought of their wedding day, when my heart swelled at seeing him with the woman he chose. I thought of the first nasty remark, the time Verity brushed past me as if I were ghost furniture. Those small moments stacked like bricks, burying me slowly until I barely recognized my own strength. Black women been swallowing hurt for generations, thinking silence is strength, but silence don't stop disrespect. It feeds it. I said the words softly to myself in the shade of that fence. I looked toward the living room window and saw my husband's framed photo. His smile, so steady, reflected in the glass. I whispered into the air, "If you were here, would they treat me like this?" I closed my eyes and for 1 second believed the answer was no. I stayed right there until dusk, watching their backs. I didn't leave the party early, but something inside me did. The afternoon sun dipped just enough to cast long shadows across the living room floor. I stepped inside and paused. Something was different, but not loud, not sudden. Subtle like dust moving in air. The couch had been shifted. The framed family photos I once kept, centered on the mantel, were nudged to the far end, barely catching the light. In their place sat Verity's glass vase collection, all clean lines and high gloss. My nameplate, the one Gideon gave me after my retirement dinner, was missing from the bookshelf. I walked in slow, scanning the room I'd furnished over decades. My fingers brushed the edge of a doily crocheted by my mother. It looked out of place now, like something left behind in a rush. From the front door, I heard the jangle of bracelets and the clack of heels. "Hey, Auntie," my cousin Patrice called out cheerfully, but she walked right past me and hugged Verity, called her Queen V. I opened my mouth to say something. Nothing came out. I smiled instead, polite and thin. Sometimes you can live in a place you helped build, but be made to feel like you don't belong there. I turned away before they saw my face and walked out to the porch, sat on the top step. The glass door reflected a silhouette. Mine, hollowed in the edges, like a ghost looking into a life she used to lead. That evening I rode with them to the community awards event, just a small thing at the neighborhood hall, folding chairs and punch-in paper cups. I wasn't sure why I even came. Habit, maybe, or the hope that something good might be remembered. The MC was a younger man, full of enthusiasm but no wisdom. "Next, we'd like to welcome to the stage Mrs. Sinclair," he said, a beat too loud. A pause too long. I sat frozen. Murmurs flitted across the room. Some folks corrected under their breath. Others just stared. My name isn't Sinclair, never has been, and nobody seemed in a rush to fix it. Verity didn't blink. She smiled like nothing happened. Gideon looked at his shoes. I stood slowly, walked to the front, offered a soft wave, and clapped along with everyone else. My heart was somewhere far behind me. Later that night, back home, I found Verity in the kitchen washing a glass. "I'd like to talk," I said. She glanced up. "Oh, something wrong?" "You changed the living room again," I said evenly. "We're just modernizing," she replied, drying her hands. "Your things looked dated. It's not personal." "But it is," I said. "My things carry my life. Don't erase me to suit your taste." She scoffed, said I was overthinking, that I should relax, that the house looked better now. I nodded once, but inside I was shaking, not from fear, from something else rising, something sharper. I went to my room and pulled out an old wooden box. Inside was a picture of my son when he was 9, and another of me and my husband on our first anniversary, holding hands in front of this very house. On top was a trinket, my mother's, smooth blue stone set in brass. Her voice echoed in my memory. "First, know who you are." I remembered another night, years ago, when Gideon introduced Verity to his in-laws with a proud smile, but he never called me Mom, not once, just Dora. I'd laughed it off then, but now I saw it for what it was, the first chip in the wall. I held the trinket tight. I wasn't going to wait for anyone to speak my name right anymore. I would speak myself into presence, into place, into truth. I would no longer let them whisper me out of my own life. Sunday morning moved slow, like it knew something was coming, but didn't want to say it yet. I stood at the sink, scrubbing the last plate from breakfast. They'd all gone to church without saying a word to me, not even a casual, "You coming, Mama?" Just the sound of car doors and laughter fading down the block. Now they were back, outside in the yard, taking pictures in front of my rose bushes. Verity's laugh rang out first, then Gideon's. The same bushes my husband and I planted on our 10th anniversary. We dug those holes ourselves, picked out the colours. I still remember how he said, "Red for love, white for peace." I pressed my palm against the kitchen window and watched them pose. Not once did anyone turn to call me out, not even a gesture. Later, I checked the family album online, those shared photos Verity loves posting. I wasn't in a single one, cropped out, clean like I never existed. When they delete you from memory, they start by cropping you out of the pictures. I dried my hands and caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My hair needed setting. My eyes looked like they'd held back too much too long. I whispered, not for anyone to hear but myself. When did I become the ghost in my own story? The front door creaked and I didn't have to look up to know who it was. Gideon stepped into the kitchen like he had a mission but didn't want to say it straight. "Hey, Ma," he said, glancing around like he was checking if someone else might overhear. "That guest bedroom near the back, mind if one of my boys crashes there this weekend, just Friday to Sunday?" I didn't rush to answer. I folded the towel over the sink, turned to him and said, "No." He blinked. "What?" I said no. He shifted. "It's just a room, you never use it." I looked him dead in the eye. "You mean the room where I kept your father's Bible? The one Mama's quilts lay folded at the end of the bed?" He paused, jaw tightened, eyes narrowed just a touch. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't explain myself any further. Not every battle needs noise, some just need a boundary. He left the room in silence. I could feel the tension follow him like smoke. Word travelled fast in that house. By the time I made it to the porch with my tea, I heard Verity from the hallway, muttering to someone on the phone. "She's being petty." Again. I didn't flinch, didn't argue. Instead, I pulled out my notebook and wrote, Day 1, the shift. When black women change the rules, folks always call it drama. Never call it dignity. The sun started to dip when the landline rang. I picked it up, half expecting a robocall, but the voice on the other end made me smile before she even said my name. Dora girl, it's Dolores from back in Georgia. It had been months, maybe a year. She was retired now, talking about tomatoes in her garden, her grandkids running through sprinklers, peace in the slow rhythm of small-town life. And you? She asked, voice soft but sharp, like she already knew. I'm managing, I said. There was a beat of quiet. Don't you let them folks turn you into background noise, she said. You still the melody. That line hit me like a hymn. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. After the call, I sat still, real still. I didn't slam the door, but I stopped holding it open. When I stepped off the bus that evening, the sky was still light, but my block looked different. Cars I didn't know lined both sides of the street. I slowed, groceries in my hands, heart sinking. My porch light glowed even though I hadn't left it on. A heavy beat of old-school R&B rolled out of my backyard, mixed with clinking glasses and women's laughter. It was the kind of sound you expect at someone's club night, not at the home you built with your husband. From the sidewalk, I could see strangers in my yard. My roses, the ones I'd planted with Josiah, were trampled. My best crystal glasses flashed in the evening sun, filled with something red. And there, in my husband's old rocker, a woman I'd never seen sat like it was hers. So this is what no means to them, I thought, stepping closer. A suggestion, not a stand. I opened my own front door, quiet, no stomping, no words, my face blank. Verity caught my eyes from the patio doors and smiled, like nothing was wrong. Inside, I walked slow. My living room smelled like perfume and wine, like strangers. Guests hushed their voices as I passed. Some chuckled. One whispered, "Auntie looking real serious tonight," and their laughter followed like a slap. In the kitchen, Verity approached me, holding one of my glasses. "It's not that deep," she said, her tone light. "You weren't using the space." I turned to her, steady. "And you weren't raised in a barn," I said, "yet here we are." Her smirk slipped into a scoff. "You always make things bigger than they are." Inside my head, the words formed like a drumbeat. They want peace without permission, comfort without consequence. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. The hiss of water heating cut through the music. No yelling, no tears, just me, moving. In my room, the noise blurred into background static. I wrapped my hands around my teacup, opened my notebook. Day 2. The disrespect don't need volume, just presence. My father's voice rose clear in my memory. If you don't teach folks how to treat you, they'll teach you how to disappear. I wrote a letter then, addressed to Gideon and Verity. Not to send, not yet. Just to see the words on paper. My pen moved steady even as the base shook the walls. From my top drawer, I took out the scarf my mother gave me, the same one I'd touched on nights when I needed to remember who I was. I wrapped it tight around my shoulders. Its weight grounded me. By the time the music faded and cars began pulling away, the house smelled like spilled wine and sweat. Guests left paper plates piled high in my sink. A cracked heirloom dish lay unnoticed on the counter. Gideon came in just as the last guest drove off. He looked around, surprised at my stillness. "Ma, you're blowing this way out of proportion," he said. "It's just a party. Verity didn't mean no harm." I looked at my son and said softly, "I see now, you both need this house more than you need me. No more arguing, no more begging for understanding." That was the night I started removing their names from my will. I came back from the grocery store later than usual, carrying a paper bag tucked against my chest. The sun had gone down, leaving the house in a strange glow, every light on, doors locked from the inside. My own key slid into the lock, but it caught, like someone had turned it twice. Inside, muffled movement, the soft creak of footsteps above, not mine. I didn't call out. I knew the rhythm of my own home, and what I was hearing didn't belong. I set the bag down quietly by the door and moved through the hallway. The scent of fresh paint hit me first, chemical and sharp. Upstairs, a low laugh floated out from my old room. Verity's laugh. I stopped mid-step, my hand gripping the banister. They always think power is in noise, but power is in wiping out the place you rest. My heart knocked slow but heavy as I walked toward that door. I opened it expecting shadows, but the brightness knocked me back. My sanctuary was gone, my writing desk, where I'd filled page after page with memories, shoved out. In its place, a sleek white console, a lamp I'd never seen before. The walls were bare, no more family photos, no portrait of Josiah watching over me. Even the quilt my mother had stitched, folded there for decades, had vanished. It looked like a stranger's guest room in a stranger's house. I reached out and touched the blank wall where Josiah's face had been. The cool paint felt like a slap. Behind me, Verity's voice. We needed something more modern. She stood in the doorway with a glass of wine, acting like a hostess showing off a remodel. I turned to her, my voice steady but sharp as a blade. You didn't need to erase me to upgrade. Her smile faltered but didn't disappear. She stepped closer, a folder in her hand. Since you're here, she said, might as well see this. She laid the papers on the new console like a prize. My eyes caught the header. Josiah's will, but not the one I knew. This version cut me out entirely, claimed I'd waived my share. Witness signatures lined the bottom, names I recognized but faces I hadn't seen in years. We're just planning ahead, Verity said, tilting her head like she was the sensible one. You've had your time. This is smart. Don't cry over something you already gave up. Behind her, two cousins hovered, pretending to look at their phones but really watching me. Gideon appeared in the hallway, his face unreadable, but he didn't speak. My pulse thudded in my ears. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. Inside, fury rose like a tide, but my face stayed calm. I asked for a copy, my voice low, and held out my hand. Verity hesitated but gave it over. The paper felt heavier than it should. I slipped it into my bag, the same bag still sitting by the door. Then I bent down and put on my shoes. I'm not walking away, I said slowly. I'm walking into truth. My scarf, the one Mama gave me, lay on the chair and I wrapped it tight around my shoulders like armor. I turned and walked out of the room, each step deliberate. In my head, they think I'll fold. But I'm not folding, never again. Downstairs, the living room buzzed with low voices. I stepped into the center, document in hand, my eyes burning through each face. When I lifted that paper high, the room went still. Even the cousins stopped whispering. The fabric they'd tried to weave without me was already coming apart, and they knew it. By the time Sunday rolled in, the sun was high and the house smelled like hickory and betrayal. Verity had taken it upon herself to host another family cookout. Flyers sent out, group chats buzzing, cars lining the street. Not once had she asked if I was okay with it, but I didn't shut it down. I let it happen. I boiled potatoes for the salad, brewed my sweet tea like I always had. Folks milled about the yard and the kitchen, laughing, joking, calling it good times. One of Gideon's cousins leaned over the counter and said, "Didn't even know you still lived here, Auntie." He chuckled like it was harmless. I just smiled. "Ain't that something?" I said. "You can live in a house, pay every bill in it, and still be invisible." Verity was in the backyard, loud and radiant, holding court like a talk show host. You'd think the home had always been hers. I stood by the screen door, watching, letting the moment settle. After I wiped my hands on a dish towel, I went to my room, pulled out the folder. 2 wills sat inside, one real, one fake. That lie they tried to sneak by me. I was done being polite. I called Carol into the kitchen. When I speak, I told her, tapping the folder, you open this, pass it if they start denying. She nodded without question. Back in my room, I slipped on that deep plum dress, the one I wore to Mother's memorial, tied my scarf just like Mama used to, hung my wedding earrings from my ears. The woman I saw in the mirror wasn't broken. She was ready. The smell of ribs, the laughter, the gospel music floating through the open windows, it all faded when I stepped into that crowd. I tapped my spoon against the mason jar. Not loud, just enough. Eyes turned, conversations quieted. Thank y'all for being here today, I started. Family's a gift. And like any gift, sometimes you don't know what you're getting till you unwrap it. Polite chuckles, few nods. Then I said it. But it's time we stop pretending what ain't been right. Time to stop letting lies sit at our tables. Verity froze, still holding a plate of deviled eggs. I looked straight at her. You tried to erase me. The room shifted. Aunt Maxine clutched her pearls like the cliché she was. Gideon's eyes darted. Verity and Gideon prepared a document, I said, one they wanted folks to sign while I was out, said I gave up my share, said I walked away. That's a lie. Verity opened her mouth, but I raised my hand. You had your turn. This one's mine. Carol, right on cue, walked up and opened the folder. She held both documents up. You'll see it for yourselves, I said. People leaned in, lips parted, even the grill smoke seemed to pause. Gideon cleared his throat. Mama, you misunderstood. I ain't misunderstood a damn thing, I snapped. I been silent, not stupid. Verity tried to step forward, but nobody moved to help her. One of my older cousins, Aunt Rena, stood and looked her square in the face. She gave y'all shelter, she said, loud and plain, and y'all gave her shame. Verity slammed her plate down. One of the dishes cracked. She stormed off the porch, heels hitting the steps hard. Gideon followed behind her, but not before glancing back at me like a boy caught stealing candy. I turned to the folks who remained. Well, I said, smiling softly, now that the air's clear, y'all hungry? And just like that, I grabbed the tongs and flipped the ribs. I didn't just get my house back, I got my name back. The sky hadn't cracked light yet when I got out of bed. No alarm clock, no noise from the house, just that stillness that comes when peace finally starts to settle in your bones. I reached for the kettle instead of the coffee pot. That little change wasn't for taste, it was a sign to myself. Tea takes patience, coffee rushes you. I wasn't rushing anymore. I stepped outside, wrapped my shawl tighter around me, and began walking down the sidewalk like I'd been doing each morning since that Sunday. Same path, same still trees, but it felt new every time. There's something about how the light slowly chases shadows off the pavement. Like it's whispering, you made it, one step at a time. Afterward, I sat with my journal, the same one I'd shut tight after my husband passed. I opened to a blank page and wrote one word, begin. Mid-morning, Mrs. Langston stopped by with her sweet potato pie. She leaned in, smiling wide. You been glowing lately, girl. I smiled back, hand on the warm dish. Sometimes peace don't come knocking. You gotta build it from scratch. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the porch caught that soft orange glow, I heard a knock. I peeked through the curtain. It was Gideon, alone. He looked different, not broken, just quiet, worn like a man who finally ran out of excuses. I opened the door, but not wide. He stood there, hands stuffed in his pockets. Mama, he said, can I talk to you? I didn't answer right away. From the porch, I said. Go ahead. He nodded, cleared his throat. Verity left, said I wasn't who she thought I was. We argued about a lot, but mostly about what family even means. I kept my eyes on his. He went on. You were the one holding this all together, and I didn't see it, not really. Not until you let it all fall. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I just listened. Every word weighed heavy, but I didn't bend under it. I stepped outside and sat on the swing. Sit on the steps, I said, not beside me. He sat, nodded. You know, I began, folks think betrayal's about knives in backs, but sometimes it's silence, absence, letting somebody else carry it all and pretending not to see the weight. He looked down. I don't need vengeance, Gideon. I need distance and I need respect. He swallowed hard. I get that. I forgive you, I said, steady as a stone, but I ain't forgetting how long I waited to hear those words. I looked past him toward the streetlights flickering on. If you really want to show up, I said, help me with the church meals on Saturdays. Start there. He nodded. I'll earn my way back if you let me. We sat in quiet for a while. Then I stood and went inside. Dinner was already on the stove. Greens simmered low, cornbread still warm, baked catfish crisp on the edges. I plated my meal, set it on the table, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I set a second plate across from me, empty, but intentional. As I ate, I thought about the path it took to get here. Every slammed door, every look of dismissal, every time I bit my tongue, and every moment I finally decided not to. After dinner, I picked up the phone and left a voicemail for Carol. Hey baby, it's Auntie, I said. Just wanted to say, thank you for being my anchor. You reminded me who I am. I hung up, then glanced at a framed picture sitting on the bookshelf. A younger me, standing beside my husband, head high. She's still here, I whispered to the room, just older, wiser, louder. This ain't the end, just the beginning of the life I choose on my own terms.